And one of the things that I wrestle with is the way in which the notion of private property has undermined our ability as human beings to reap the bounty of the earth, to look after ourselves and so on. And once private ownership enters the equation and private benefit from what should be a public good, it destroys people's ability to look after themselves and their families. And we end up with the increasing disparity in wealth and so on, which in turn leads to even more distortion of the ownership of what should be common. It's not just that there's not enough land, there's not enough water. Why is there not enough water? Why is there not enough access to all the things that make life not just bearable, but good? And for me, that's the issue that we've missed. All our socialist theories and things, I think, miss the point of returning the commons to the people. Oakland is so important. So it seems to me that what's happening in Oakland, starting with the really famous book about Oakland's not for burning, charts the discussions that you're talking about. And that's what we're missing. Sorry.
No. Talk more. Talk.
But I really believe that, particularly in South Africa, we're talking about the wrong things all the time. We're talking about Jimmy Money and all these irrelevant people. We should really be talking about how do we open up the land so that one person doesn't own 10,000 hectares and someone else hasn't even got a place to sleep. And the productivity that comes from sharing better. But as you say, it's getting about how we get from here to there. But it's about how we conduct the conversation. And we cannot conduct it under the circumstances that we have at the moment, which brings us back to why we're here to Hate Square.
Well, but what's interesting, I mean, when you talk about land reform, for instance, certainly in sort of policy circles and NGOs that are not the Church Land Programme, as soon as you say land reform, they say Mugabe. You say land reform, they say Mugabe. And what's interesting about that is that there's been a lot of research saying actually land reform kind of worked.
Yeah.
And this is, land reform is about, in a sense, of course, this is entirely unsurprising, where people who were landless and begging on the streets, all of a sudden, when they got access to land, were they better off? Hell yeah. They had land. And did the government provide them access to water and technology and extension services? No, the government didn't. The government's like, you've got land, and I go, be happy and vote Zanu-PF. But
You have to.
Well, I mean, and sometimes the way you got that land was by voting Zanu-PF. Yeah. But the fact is that if you got that land, you were better off. And that, people have succeeded in this fast-track land reform for many poor people has worked despite Mugabe. It's worked despite the failure of ZANU-PF, and it's difficult to sort of say, well, actually, land reform kind of works even in Zimbabwe despite Robert Mugabe. But the fact is that land redistribution is a great technology for increasing productivity and for fighting poverty. And we know, the World Bank says so. They just don't like the way you do it. So I mean, I think that when it comes to, and of course the awful way in which land is not talked about in South Africa is, it requires cultural intervention and land occupation, of course, because land occupation is also a cultural intervention. And I think but that it requires organising, and it requires self-defence, and it requires a whole bunch of other things. And of course that's again the difficulty of the project here. We go to Brazil, we see how they do it. We come back here, and that's why the land occupations of Alaflani are tremendously important and inspiring. because they do offer a new vocabulary for understanding how land reform can and should work.